14. Haunted by my sister's doll. Ever since Drox 56 was at school with friends talking about Chucky, they've been afraid of dolls. Luckily, the only one they had at home was a basic Barbie doll, but then, for Christmas their sister got 2 porcelain dolls and a big rag doll. Those dolls really freaked the Reddit user out. Every time they went into their sister's room, they would turn the dolls toward the wall so they weren't looking at them or into their room. Soon, creepy things started happening. Cuts and scratches would appear on the writer's hands and knees with no explanation of how they got there. One morning when they woke up, there were red scratches on their back, although they didn't remember any pain or feeling of being scratched. The scariest thing happened while they were home alone. They went into the sister's room to play with her Dreamcast. As they made their way in, turning all the dolls toward the wall, they heard a little girl's laugh. The rag doll that had been lying on their sister's bed facing the wall slowly began turning toward them. They ran, locking themselves in their room until their mother and sister got home. Neither believed the story, and their sister was mad because the rag doll had fallen to the floor. The next day, the writer took the doll to the dumpster and never saw it again. 15. The lady in the corner. Strange things have been happening in Red Cotty 27's house for as long as they can remember. One night, they woke to the sound of someone standing just outside their room, the floor creaking under their weight. They closed their eyes and pretended to be asleep, hoping it would leave them alone. Whatever it was entered the room and stopped right beside the bed. They could feel the presence there. They cracked open their eyes, hoping to still appear asleep while stealing a glimpse at the presence. A white figure stood in front of them. At first, they wanted to call to their brother, but they were too afraid to antagonize the ghost. Eventually, their eyes closed, and when they opened them again a few minutes later, the figure was gone. Thinking their father's bedroom would be a safer place to sleep, they wrapped themselves in a blanket and made their way across the house. But when they entered the dining room, they felt as though several pairs of eyes were staring at them. They kept going until they reached the doors of the bedroom, but it was locked. Instead of going back to their room, they went into the living room and fell asleep. Around 4 in the morning, they woke again, and sitting on top of the television in the corner was the white figure. This time, it was clear the figure was an elderly woman. She was somewhat blurry, and her eyes were darker than her pale body. She said their name and tried coaxing them outside. They screamed, and the figure vanished. They hid under the blanket until morning. When daylight had come, they told their story to their family. Their brother believed every word, saying he had seen the exact same figure watching him sleep. 16. Home alone. I think. One day, Penning wasn't feeling well, so they stayed home from work. They were in bed, asleep on their back with a pillow over their face, when they heard their door open. They were still half asleep, so they didn't fully register the door being opened. Then, they felt a pressure on their stomach like someone was poking them with 2 or 3 fingers. They jumped and heard the sound of retreating footsteps, but the pillow was still over their head so they couldn't see who or what it was. The footsteps sounded more like a light pitter-patter than actual human footsteps. Assuming it was their mother home from lunch break, they at first thought nothing of it. Checking their phone, they saw it was only 10 a.m., much too early for their mom to be home. As they were sitting in bed, exactly what had happened began to settle in, and they started getting really nervous. Suddenly, the door opened. They ran from their room through a different door that leads outside and called their mother. She came home, and they looked through the house together. While they were looking, the door handle to a closet started to jiggle violently, freaking both of them out. That night, the two told the writer's stepfather, who at first didn't believe them. He only started to after weird things started happening all over the house, pans flying across the kitchen, stuff randomly falling from the walls, and the new cat freaking out for no apparent reason. 17. The disembodied voice. The house KRH21 grew up in was ancient. When they were about 8, they started seeing strange shadows and hearing voices. Their parents would dismiss the accounts as part of their imagination. Most were unsettling, but nothing was ever too scary. One night, 3 years ago, they were laying on their couch with the door open when they got the feeling that they were being watched. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't shake the feeling. Then the hairs on the back of their neck stood up, and they knew something was right behind them. They felt someone's breath on their neck, and a voice said, "We can see you." They screamed and jumped up, and ran out of the room. 18. Henry the Hitchhiker. A couple years ago, Tupero was working the night shift, and was on their way to work when they were stopped at a street light. Since there were no other cars or people around, they quickly got impatient with the waiting around. That was when they heard a knock on the passenger window. Outside stood an older man, seemingly around 60. They rolled down their window and asked if he was okay. When he didn't answer, the writer asked again but still got no response. Finally, he asked for a ride, saying that he only needed to go a few blocks. The writer said yes and turned up the heat after he got in, noticing that the man was shivering. After they had been driving for a while, the man said his name was Henry. The driver asked once more if he was okay. Henry seemed drunk or ill. Henry sat still, saying nothing. After about 10 minutes of driving, Henry suddenly shouted, asking the driver to stop early. They were in the middle of nowhere with fields on either side. Henry climbed from the car and started walking down the street. He then suddenly stopped in the middle of the road and stood there unmoving. Slowly, they started to drive away, and looking in the rear-view mirror, they saw Henry following the car. Their attention briefly shifted down because of a notification of their phone. When they looked up again, Henry was gone. They sped to work and told a coworker about the incident as soon as possible. Apparently Henry is a regular and does this often, freaking out newcomers to the area. 19. Touched by a spirit. One night, Erd was at a friend's house. She was downstairs watching a movie, and the friend was upstairs playing video games. Feeling neglected, she fell asleep despite feeling deeply uncomfortable, like she was being watched. She went back to sleep after asking her friend if he'd be coming to bed soon. When she woke again, it was to someone touching her face, saying, "Don't worry love, I'll be down soon." She disregarded it as a dream and went back to sleep. Then she was awoken again by the same voice saying, I know, I keep using this excuse. I'm coming soon. I really do miss you." This time, she knew something wasn't right. She got out of bed and searched the entire downstairs area, but found nothing. She heard snoring upstairs and knew her friend was sound asleep. Since it was now 7 in the morning, she got ready and left for work. The next time they were together, she asked her friend if he'd been messing with her that night. He said no, but at that moment, a song came on the car radio that sounded exactly like the voice. She asked who the singer was, and he said it was his best friend's band. His best friend had been the lead singer but had committed suicide a year before. They'd lived together for a while, and most of his stuff was still in the house. It appears that at least his dead ghost friend hadn't wanted her to be alone.